Kara stood at the edge of the crystalline peaks, her massive wings folded tight against her scaled body. The wind cut through her golden scales like invisible blades, and she could feel the cold seeping into her bones. Behind her, the great doors of the dragon colony were closing forever. She could hear the heavy sound of stone grinding against stone, sealing her fate. The elders had spoken their judgment, and there was no appeal, no mercy, no second chance. 3 weeks ago, Kara had been happy. She had a mate named Thorn, and they loved each other deeply. When she discovered she was carrying eggs, she thought her life would be perfect. But there was one problem, a terrible, unforgivable problem. She had become pregnant during the wrong season. The dragon colony had strict rules about when dragons could have babies. There was an appointed breeding season, a time chosen by the elders to ensure the colony had enough food and resources. Breaking this law was considered one of the worst crimes a dragon could commit. Kara had not meant to break the law. Love had no calendar. Love did not wait for the proper season. But the elders did not care about love. They only cared about rules and order and control. When they discovered her condition, they were furious. The council met in secret, and within hours the decision was made. Kara would be exiled immediately. She would be cast out into the frozen wastes, far from the colony, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the eggs growing inside her belly. Thorn had begged the elders to reconsider. He had fallen to his knees before the council chamber and pleaded for his mate's life. But the guards had dragged him away, and his cries had echoed through the mountain tunnels as Kara was pushed toward the exit. She would never forget the sound of his voice, growing fainter and fainter as she was forced into exile. Now, standing alone in the frozen landscape, Kara felt the weight of the eggs inside her. She could feel them moving slightly, shifting their positions as they grew. They were alive, developing, becoming stronger with each passing day. But Kara knew that her eggs needed warmth to survive. Dragon eggs required constant heat, a specific temperature maintained in the warm caverns deep within the mountain. Out here in the frozen wastes, the temperature dropped below freezing every single night. Kara walked for hours searching for shelter. Her wings were tired, and her body ached with the burden of carrying the eggs. The snow crunched beneath her claws, and the landscape around her was empty and desolate. There were no other dragons here. There were no warm caves. There was nothing but endless white and bitter cold. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and blue, Kara spotted a cave in the distance. It was small, barely large enough for her massive body, but it offered shelter from the wind. She dragged herself toward it, moving slowly, conserving her energy. The cave smelled old and unused, but it was better than nothing. Inside the cave, Kara curled herself into a tight ball, wrapping her tail around her body for warmth. She could feel the temperature dropping as night fell. Her breath formed white clouds in the freezing air. She tried to focus her inner heat, drawing upon the natural warmth that all dragons possessed, but it was not enough. She could feel the eggs weakening inside her, their growth slowing as the cold seeped into her body. Days passed. Kara hunted when she could, flying on weak wings to catch small animals that lived in the frozen landscape. But hunting was difficult and she was constantly exhausted. She needed to eat more to maintain her strength, but there was very little food available in this barren place. Her scales, which had once shone with a brilliant golden color, began to dull and fade. Her eyes, which had once sparkled with life and hope, grew dim and tired. The eggs were dying. Kara could feel it with a mother's instinct. They were growing colder, their movements becoming slower and weaker. She desperately tried to keep them warm, staying curled around them day and night, pouring all her remaining strength into maintaining her body heat. But it was not working. Day by day, she could feel her unborn children slipping away from her. Kara began to lose hope. She wondered if the elders had intended this all along. Perhaps exile was not just a punishment, perhaps it was a death sentence, a slow and painful way to eliminate her and her illegal offspring. She thought about Thorn and wondered if he was suffering as much as she was. She thought about the life she could have had, the joy of raising her dragonlings in the warm mountain caves, teaching them to fly and hunt and live as dragons should live. But none of that would happen now. None of that would ever happen. On the 23rd day of her exile, Kara was so weak that she could barely move. She lay in her cave, barely breathing, feeling the last bit of warmth draining from her body. The eggs inside her had grown so cold that she could no longer feel them moving. She assumed they were dead or dying, and the thought filled her with such despair that she wanted to simply close her eyes and let the cold take her too. That was when she heard it, a sound so strange and terrible that it cut through her despair and made her lift her head slightly. It was the sound of something falling from the sky, metal shrieking against the air, A crash that shook the very ground beneath her. Kara's weak eyes opened wider. Something had landed nearby. Something was coming toward her cave. She did not know if it would be a savior or a predator, but she was too weak to care. Whatever fate was about to find her, she was ready to accept it. She had no strength left to fight. She waited in the darkness, listening to the footsteps coming closer and closer to her cave entrance. David Chin had been flying for 3 years without a single major problem. His salvage ship, the Iron Compass, was old and worn, but it had never let him down. He flew across the outer colonies, collecting scrap metal and broken technology from abandoned worlds. It was lonely work, but it paid well enough, and loneliness was something David had learned to accept a long time ago. 3 years ago, David had made a choice that changed his entire life. He had worked for a military company called Nexus Corporation. His job was to build weapons. Weapons designed to kill people efficiently and without mercy. David was very good at his job. His designs were clever and effective. But one day something inside him broke. He could no longer ignore what his work was doing to the world. When his commanders ordered him to design a new type of weapon that would kill civilians as well as soldiers, David refused. It was a simple word, just one syllable, but it destroyed everything he had built. Within hours he was labeled a traitor. Within days he was hunted. Nexus Corporation wanted him dead or captured, so David did the only thing he could do. He stole a salvage ship and ran. Now, 3 years later, David thought he had finally found peace. He worked alone, asked no questions, and hurt no one. But on this particular day, the universe decided to remind him that peace never lasted. It started with a strange sound on his instruments. David was flying through a region of space he had never visited before, scanning for valuable wreckage when his systems began to go crazy. Alarms blared. Lights flashed red across his control panel. His navigation computer showed a massive solar flare approaching his position, a wave of radiation and electromagnetic energy that could destroy any ship unlucky enough to be caught in it. David tried to fly away from it, pushing his engines to their maximum. But the flare was too fast and too powerful. It hit his ship like a physical blow, and suddenly, all his systems went dark. The engines died. The navigation computer exploded in a shower of sparks. The ship lurched violently, and David held onto his pilot's seat as the vessel began to spin out of control. He was going to crash. He knew it with absolute certainty. This was the end. After 3 years of running and hiding, after 3 years of thinking he might actually make it, he was going to die here on some unknown planet, burned up in the atmosphere or smashed to pieces on the ground below. David did the only thing he could do. He held on tight and prayed. The crash was violent and terrifying. The ship hit the ground hard, bounced once, then tumbled sideways. Metal screamed as it twisted and bent. David was thrown around the cockpit like a doll, his head slamming against various surfaces. He tasted blood. He heard the sound of the hull breaking open. And then, finally, everything went dark and silent. When David woke up, he was not sure if he was alive or dead. His entire body hurt. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead. His left arm felt like it might be broken. But he was breathing. His heart was still beating. Somehow, against all odds, he had survived. He pulled himself out of the twisted cockpit and stood up, swaying on unsteady legs. Around him, the landscape was white and frozen. Snow covered everything. In the distance, jagged mountains reached toward a pale sky. This was a cold world, very cold, and David was wearing only a thin flight suit designed for a pressurized cabin, not for Arctic exploration. He had perhaps a few hours before the cold killed him. He needed shelter immediately. David looked around and spotted something that made his spirits rise slightly, a dark opening in the mountainside about a quarter-mile away. It looked like a cave. Caves often held geothermal heat. If he could reach it before nightfall, he might survive the night. He began walking, moving as quickly as his injured body would allow. The snow was deep and his feet sank with each step. The cold cut through his suit like invisible knives. His breath formed white clouds in front of his face, and his fingers were already starting to go numb. After what felt like hours, David finally reached the cave. He stumbled inside, grateful to be out of the wind. The cave was dark, but it was warmer than the outside air. David's eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, and that was when he saw her. At first, David thought he was hallucinating. His injured brain was playing tricks on him, creating monsters out of shadows. But then the creature moved and he knew it was real. It was a dragon. A massive ancient dragon with dull golden scales and eyes that seemed to hold infinite sadness. The dragon was dying. David could see it immediately. Her body was thin and weak. Her breathing was shallow and labored. She lay curled around something, a nest of some kind, and she watched him with eyes that held no aggression, only desperation. David's first instinct was to run. This was a dragon, a creature from legends and nightmares. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the look in her eyes. Maybe it was because David had spent so long running from the people who wanted to kill him that he recognized fear when he saw it. And this dragon was afraid. Not of him but of something else. Something worse. David moved slowly, making no sudden movements. He approached the dragon carefully, keeping his hands visible and open. The dragon watched him but did not attack. She simply lay there, her tail wrapped protectively around the nest. That was when David noticed the eggs. 4 large eggs, covered in a faintly luminous coating. They were cold. The dragon was desperately trying to keep them warm, but she was failing. The eggs were dying and so was the dragon. David had spent 3 years running away from problems. But he was also a mechanic. He was a man who knew how to fix things. And suddenly, standing in that cave with a dying dragon and her failing eggs, David realized that this was exactly what he had been running toward all along. A chance to help. A chance to save a life instead of taking one. He looked at the dragon and made a decision. "I can help you," he said quietly. And then he got to work. David worked through the night without stopping. His broken arm throbbed with pain, and his fingers were so cold they barely obeyed his commands, but he did not rest. He knew that every minute counted. The eggs were losing heat rapidly, and the dragon was too weak to warm them any longer. He moved through the wreckage of his ship, salvaging every piece of technology that might be useful. Thermal panels that had powered the ship's heating system. Power cells that still held enough energy to function. Insulation material from the cargo hold. David dragged everything back to the cave and began assembling a makeshift incubator. His hands worked with mechanical precision, born from years of building weapons and fixing broken machines. He arranged the thermal panels around the nest, creating a gentle cocoon of warmth. He connected the power cells using cables salvaged from the ship's electrical system. He layered insulation around everything, trapping the heat inside. His salvage scanner, still functioning despite the crash, showed him exactly what temperature the eggs needed to survive. The dragon watched him work. She did not move or speak. She simply observed with those sad, ancient eyes, as if she was watching a stranger try to save her life and did not dare to hope that he would succeed. By the time the sun rose over the frozen mountains, David had created something remarkable. The eggs glowed softly, bathed in the gentle warmth of the thermal system. The temperature inside the incubator was steady and constant. David checked his scanner 3 times to make sure everything was correct. The eggs were no longer dying. They were surviving. The dragon made a sound then, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep inside her chest. It was not a threatening sound. It was something else. Something that might have been gratitude. David collapsed onto the cave floor, exhausted beyond measure. His arm was definitely broken. His body was covered in bruises. He had not eaten in more than 24 hours. But he had done it. He had saved the eggs. Over the following days, communication began to develop between the man and the dragon, though neither of them spoke the other's language. David learned to read the dragon's body language. When she made a low rumbling sound, it meant she was content. When she shifted her position, it meant she needed something. When she made a sharp clicking sound with her teeth, it meant danger was approaching. The dragon in turn began to understand David. She watched how he maintained the thermal systems, checking them constantly to ensure they worked properly. She saw how he treated his own injuries, wrapping his broken arm with strips of material from his flight suit. She understood that this human had saved her life, and more importantly, he had saved the lives of her unborn children. David began to tell her his story. He did not know if she understood his words, but he talked anyway. He needed to talk. He needed someone to listen, even if that someone was a dragon. "My name is David," he said, touching his chest. "I used to build weapons. Bad weapons. Weapons that hurt people. I said no to my bosses and they called me a traitor. They hunted me. So I ran. I have been running for 3 years." The dragon listened. She did not judge him. She simply listened. One morning, David realized that the dragon was dying of hunger. She was so weak that she could barely lift her head. The eggs were warm and safe now, but their mother was starving herself to protect them. David knew what he had to do. "I will hunt for you," he said. "I will bring you food." He spent that entire day searching the frozen landscape for prey. He found rabbits huddled beneath the snow. He found birds roosting in ice-covered trees. His broken arm made everything difficult, but he managed to catch enough food to fill his arms. When he returned to the cave, he laid the dead animals in front of the dragon. She looked at him with eyes that suddenly seemed less sad. As days turned into weeks, something unexpected happened. The dragon began to grow stronger. David's hunting skills improved, and he brought her larger prey. The dragon started to help him in ways he had not anticipated. She would point her snout toward areas where animals were likely to be found. When danger approached, and occasionally predators did wander near the cave, she would drive them away with a simple growl. They became partners. One evening, David sat beside the dragon as snow fell gently outside the cave. He placed his hand carefully against her warm scales. The dragon did not pull away. She made that low rumbling sound again, the sound that David had come to recognize as contentment. "We are both broken," David whispered. "We are both running from the world. But maybe we do not have to run alone. Maybe we can fix each other." The dragon shifted closer to him as if in agreement. David realized something important during those long weeks in the cave. He had spent 3 years running away from problems, but what he really needed was to run toward something. Toward purpose. Toward meaning. Toward a life where he could actually help instead of hurt. This dragon and her eggs had given him that opportunity. "I do not know what is going to happen," David said to the dragon. "I do not know if we will survive this. But I promise you something. I will do everything in my power to keep you and your babies alive. I will not abandon you. I will not give up." The dragon closed her eyes, and for the first time since David had found her, she looked peaceful. They were no longer alone. They had found each other in the frozen darkness, 2 exiles from their respective worlds, and together they had become strong. They had become a family. And in the warm glow of the thermal incubators, the eggs continued to grow stronger with each passing day. The first egg began to crack on the 73rd day. David was sitting near the incubator when he heard it, a soft tapping sound like tiny claws scratching from inside the shell. He leaned closer, hardly daring to breathe. The crack in the egg's surface grew wider. Another tap. Then another. The dragonling inside was fighting to get out, pushing against the shell with all its strength. Kara lifted her head, her eyes suddenly alert and focused. She made a sound David had never heard before, a high musical note that filled the entire cave. It was a mother's call to her unborn child. The egg cracked completely. A small dragonling, no larger than David's torso, tumbled out onto the warm nest. Its scales were golden and silver, shimmering with newborn moisture. It was absolutely beautiful. The tiny dragon looked around with wide, confused eyes, seeing the world for the first time. David felt tears streaming down his face. He did not try to stop them. Kara reached down carefully and nuzzled the dragonling, making soft rumbling sounds. The baby dragon chirped in response, a sound so sweet and innocent that David's heart felt like it might burst from his chest. Over the next 12 hours, 3 more dragonlings hatched. Each one was perfect. Each one was healthy and strong. 4 tiny dragons, golden and silver and full of life, crawled across the warm nest and climbed over each other in clumsy wonder. They were so small, so fragile, so absolutely miraculous. Kara spent the entire day caring for her babies. She licked them clean. She positioned them so they could nurse. She held them close to her body, keeping them warm. David watched the scene unfold and thought about everything that had led to this moment. The crash. The cold. The desperate race against time. And now this, new life, pure and untainted by the world's cruelty. David named the dragonlings. The largest was strong and bold, so he called him Soren. The smallest was curious and adventurous, so he called her Lily. The third, who seemed thoughtful and calm, he named Owen. And the fourth, who was mischievous and playful, he called Iris. For 2 weeks, David and Kara lived in a bubble of joy. The cave became a nursery. David hunted constantly to keep Kara fed, because a nursing mother needed enormous amounts of food. He brought her rabbits and birds and occasionally larger prey that Kara herself managed to catch on short hunting flights. The dragonlings grew rapidly, their scales brightening and hardening. They began to play with each other, wrestling and tumbling, their tiny roars echoing through the cave. David taught them simple things. He showed them how to climb. He taught them to recognize danger. He sat with them while they slept, watching their tiny chests rise and fall with each breath. He had never imagined having a family, but somehow in this frozen cave far from civilization, he had found one. Then everything changed. On the 15th day after the hatching, David heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was the sound of large wings cutting through the air, multiple wings, moving in coordinated formation. He ran to the cave entrance and looked up at the sky. 6 dragons were descending toward the cave. David's heart pounded in his chest. He knew immediately that these were not friendly visitors. These were soldiers. dragon soldiers. They wore armor that caught the sunlight, and their scales bore markings that indicated rank and authority. At the head of the formation flew a dragon with silver scales so bright they hurt to look at. His wings were scarred from ancient battles, and his eyes held the cold certainty of absolute power. This was Theron, the warden of the mountain, the keeper of dragon law. David ran back into the cave. Kara was already standing, her dragonlings huddled behind her. She knew what was coming. Her body tensed, ready to fight or flee, but she was trapped. There was only one entrance to the cave, and 6 armed dragons blocked the sky. The dragons landed at the cave entrance, their massive forms filling the space. Theron stepped forward, his tail swishing with controlled fury. Kara, his voice boomed like thunder. You are ordered to surrender the illegal clutch immediately. The eggs have hatched, which means your crime is complete. The law is clear. All offspring born outside the appointed season must be destroyed. No. David shouted, stepping forward. Look at them. Look at these dragonlings. They are healthy and strong. They are perfect. Silence, human, one of the soldiers hissed, raising a weapon toward David. The gun crackled with energy. But Theron held up a claw and the soldier stopped. The warden's ancient eyes studied David with curiosity and confusion. What is this? Theron asked, gesturing toward the thermal incubators and the salvage technology that covered the cave floor. How did a human keep dragon eggs alive? David's mind raced. This was his only chance. He began to explain quickly, showing Theron the thermal panels, the power cells, the insulation systems. He explained how he had adapted human technology to support dragon physiology. He talked about the dragonlings' health, about how they were the strongest eggs Kara had ever carried because they had received constant, perfect care. The law says that breeding outside the season will destroy the colony, David said desperately. But look at what we have created here. Health, strength, life. The law is wrong. The law is killing your species, not saving it. Theron was silent for a long moment. He approached the nest slowly and looked at the 4 dragonlings. They looked back at him with innocent eyes, unaware of the danger they faced. One of them, little Iris, actually waddled forward and touched the warden's foot with her tiny snout. Something in Theron's expression changed. Take the human into custody, he finally said. We will bring him and the dragon and the clutch before the council. The elders will decide what is to be done. As soldiers moved forward to bind David's hands, he looked at Kara. She looked terrified, but she stood protectively over her dragonlings. They had come so far. They had survived so much. But their greatest trial was just beginning. The journey back to the crystalline peaks would take hours. And what awaited them there, neither David nor Kara could predict. The Dragon Council chamber was vast and ancient, carved from stone that had stood for thousands of years. Massive pillars reached toward a ceiling so high that it disappeared into shadow. The walls were covered in inscriptions telling the history of dragon law, dragon wisdom, and dragon power. This was the heart of the Crystalline Peaks colony, the place where the most important decisions were made. 20 elders sat in judgment, their scales bearing the colors of age and authority. Theron stood at the center, his silver scales gleaming in the torchlight. David was brought before them, his hands bound with chains of woven metal. Kara was forced to remain outside the chamber with her 4 dragonlings, separated from the human who had become her closest friend and family. An elder named Gorvin, whose scales were so pale they were almost white, stood and pointed at David with a long claw. This human has violated our most sacred law, Gorvin declared. He has interfered with the natural order. He has helped a dragon commit the crime of out-of-season breeding. The punishment for such interference is death. David's hands clenched into fists, but he did not speak. He had learned that sometimes silence was more powerful than words. Another elder, a female named Sora whose scales were deep red like fire, stood up. But look at what this human has created, she said. The dragonlings are healthy beyond measure. I have not seen such vitality in young dragons for 50 years. And the technology he has developed, it could revolutionize how we care for eggs. It could increase our population significantly. The law is the law, Gorvin insisted coldly. We cannot break our traditions simply because the results are favorable. If we do, what message does that send? That any dragon can breed whenever they wish? That our laws mean nothing? Theron raised his voice. I propose that we listen to what the human has to say before we pass judgment. He has earned that much. David stepped forward. The chains clinked as he moved. He looked directly at the council, making eye contact with each elder in turn. He spoke slowly and carefully, knowing that his life and the lives of Kara and her dragonlings depended on his words. "I understand your laws," David began. "I understand that you created them for a reason. You need to control your population. You need to ensure that you have enough food and resources. These are good reasons. These are wise reasons. But your law is failing. Look at your colony. How many dragonlings have been born in the last 5 years?" Gorvin remained silent, but his expression darkened. "I will tell you," David continued. "Very few. Your population is declining. Your species is dying slowly not because of out-of-season breeding, but because your law prevents enough breeding to replace the dragons that pass away." "The human speaks lies," one of the elders muttered. "I speak truth," David said firmly. "I'm not asking you to change your law completely. I'm asking you to consider something. What if out-of-season breeding could be controlled? What if, instead of banishing and destroying, you could monitor it? What if human technology could help dragon eggs survive, reducing the burden on your resources?" Sora leaned forward with great interest. "What are you proposing?" "I propose a partnership," David said. "I propose that humans and dragons work together. I can teach you how to use the technology that saved Kara's eggs. Your scientists can learn from what I have built. Together we can create a better future for both our species." The council chamber erupted in arguments. Some elders thought David's proposal was revolutionary and wise. Others thought it was insanity, a violation of everything dragons held sacred. Gorvin and his supporters insisted on death. Sora and her allies argued for mercy and experimentation. Finally, Theron stood and demanded silence. When the council had quieted, he spoke with the authority of someone who had lived for centuries and seen many changes. "I make this proposal," Theron announced. "Let David and Kara establish a settlement at the southern edge of our territory. Let them create a place where human and dragon can live together. Let them develop this technology further. And let them prove whether this partnership can work. If they succeed, we will have gained much. If they fail, we will have lost nothing of importance." The vote was close, but in the end, the council agreed. Gorvin and his supporters abstained in angry silence, but they did not block the decision. David was released from his chains. Kara was brought into the chamber with her 4 dragonlings. When Mother and humans saw each other again, something unspoken passed between them. Kara made a sound of relief, and the dragonlings ran to David, climbing over him with joy. The elders watched this scene with expressions that ranged from wonder to disapproval. 3 months later, the first hybrid settlement was officially established. It was built at the edge of the crystalline peaks, in a valley where geothermal vents provided natural warmth. Human refugees who had fled from Nexus Corporation and other military organizations came to join David. Other dragons, curious about this new way of living, came to learn from Kara. David trained human mechanics to maintain and improve the thermal technology. Kara worked with other dragons to understand how this new system could be applied throughout the colony. The dragonlings grew strong and healthy, learning to think like both dragons and humans, understanding both instinct and innovation. 5 years later, the hybrid settlement had become a beacon of hope. The dragon colony's population began to increase for the first time in generations. Human refugees found purpose and belonging. Dragons discovered that cooperation with another species could bring strength, not weakness. On a quiet evening, David sat beside Kara on a high cliff overlooking the settlement. The twin moons were rising, painting the sky in shades of silver and blue. Below them, humans and dragons worked together, building structures, sharing meals, teaching each other their languages and customs. The 4 dragonlings had grown into strong young dragons. Soren was training to be an ambassador between the species. Lily had become fascinated with mechanics and worked alongside David in the laboratory. Owen was studying dragon history and culture, documenting the changes happening in their world. And Iris, the playful one, had become a bridge between human children and young dragons, teaching them to play together and understand each other. "We did it," David whispered, placing his hand gently on Kara's warm scales. Kara made that familiar rumbling sound, the one that David had come to love and recognize as the sound of contentment, of belonging, of home. A new age had begun. An age where exile became community. An age where law was tempered with compassion. An age where 2 different species learned that together, they could build something far greater than either could build alone. And in the crystalline peaks, the sound of laughter, both human and dragon, echoed through the mountains, a song of hope for all the worlds to hear.